It was the morning of October 15th, 2019, in the quiet suburban town of Silver Ridge, Indiana. A crisp autumn chill hung in the air as residents of the neighborhood began to prepare for their weekend yard sales. It was a normal Saturday morning. People rummaging through old clothes, bargain hunting for furniture, and chatting with their neighbors over cups of coffee. But this particular yard sale at 314 Evergreen Avenue was different. Welcome to Echoes of Fear, your haven for the most terrifying mysteries and the most disturbing true crime stories. In today's video, I bring you real-life crime tales that challenge human comprehension and continue to haunt our minds, even after time has passed. Get ready for a dark and unsettling journey where the line between reality and fear becomes ever thinner. If you have the courage, settle in, because today's stories will haunt your mind, and who knows, maybe even your dreams. Around 9 a.m., the Wilson family, owners of the house, began setting out their belongings on the front lawn. They had lived in Silver Ridge for over 20 years, and the neighborhood was tight-knit, with everyone knowing each other. To most, the Wilsons were just another quiet, family-oriented couple who had lived in the area for years. But as the day would unfold, their name would become synonymous with a mystery that no one could have predicted. "I never thought it'd happen here, not in Silver Ridge," said Marissa Keller, a neighbor who lived 2 houses down. Marissa had been one of the first to show up at the yard sale. She'd often spent her Saturdays searching for trinkets, clothes, and odd antiques to decorate her home. But this time, something caught her attention. Something out of place. I remember walking up to the table, and there, right in the middle, was an old leather-bound journal. It didn't look like anything you'd normally see at a yard sale. It was too perfect, you know? Like it didn't belong with the rest of the junk. Marissa wasn't the only one who noticed. Shortly after she picked up the journal, another woman, Karen Lopez, arrived at the sale. Karen was a close friend of the Wilsons, a regular visitor to their home. But when she walked over to the table, her eyes immediately locked onto the same journal. I saw her holding it, and I swear, her face went pale. Karen recalled in an interview with the police later. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at it like she had seen a ghost. I thought it was weird, but I didn't think too much of it. Marissa, oblivious to Karen's reaction, continued flipping through the pages of the journal, curious about its contents. It was filled with handwritten notes and sketches, detailing the life of someone named Evelyn, who seemed to have lived in the house decades earlier. The journal chronicled a bizarre and unsettling series of events, things like strange figures seen in the woods behind the house, whispers in the night, and an eerie obsession with the house's basement. But the most disturbing part was the final entry, dated August 28th, 1987. It read, "Tonight, I hear them again. The footsteps in the hall. I don't know who they belong to, but I feel them watching me. It's only a matter of time before they come for me. I can feel it in my bones." Before Karen could ask any questions, she quickly grabbed the journal from Marissa's hands and walked over to the Wilsons. Her face flushed with anxiety. She asked to speak with them privately. "Everything okay?" Marissa asked, noticing Karen's distressed expression as she walked away. The Wilsons, Tom and Jessica, looked at each other before offering a forced smile. Tom Wilson, in his late 40s, was a mechanic. He had always been the strong, silent type, while his wife Jessica, a teacher, was the more outgoing of the two. But that day, both of them seemed visibly shaken. "It's just an old family heirloom," Tom said, trying to brush it off. "We didn't think anyone would be interested in it." But it was clear from Karen's reaction that something wasn't right. Later that afternoon, at approximately 2:15 p.m., a strange occurrence sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. A loud noise, like a crash, was heard coming from the Wilsons' house. It was loud enough to draw the attention of several neighbors, including Marissa, who immediately went to the house to check on them. When Marissa arrived, she was greeted by a disturbing sight. Tom was standing in the yard, pacing, his hands trembling. Jessica was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Jessica?" Marissa asked, her voice tense with concern. Tom's eyes were wide, his face pale. "She's gone," he said, his voice barely audible. She was here, and now she's gone." Confused, Marissa asked him to clarify. "What do you mean, gone? Did she leave?" "No," Tom whispered, shaking his head. "I heard something. Footsteps. I thought it was Jessica at first, but when I went upstairs to check, the door was open. The journal's gone. And Jessica's gone too." A chill ran down Marissa's spine. The journal, the one Karen had found. She suddenly realized that the odd events at the yard sale were no coincidence. She tried to calm Tom down, but his distress only seemed to grow. "You don't understand. I heard something last night. Whispers, like a voice calling my name. I thought I was just tired, but now I know it was real. And Jessica, she's part of it." By now, Marissa was too terrified to speak. The sudden disappearance of Jessica Wilson, coupled with the ominous journal, felt like something out of a horror movie. But there was no time to waste. She called the authorities, and the police arrived at the Wilsons' house around 3:30 p.m. Detective Laura Sanders, who had been with the Silver Ridge Police Department for almost 15 years, arrived at the scene. She quickly took control of the situation, instructing the officers to search the house and surrounding area. The first thing they did was check the basement, the same one mentioned in the journal. But what they found there was even more chilling than anything they could have imagined. The basement door was wide open, the wooden floor covered in fresh scratch marks, as though something, or someone, had been dragged across it. And there, in the corner of the basement, lay a single, strange object. An old, tarnished key with intricate engravings etched into its surface. The key was eerily familiar. But to who? Detective Sanders turned to the neighbors, who were all gathered in the yard, their faces filled with dread. "We need answers," she said, her voice firm. "Someone knows what happened here, and I'm going to find out." But the deeper the investigation went, the more questions arose. The journal had been in the Wilsons' possession for years. So why had Jessica reacted so strangely when she found it? And why had she disappeared so suddenly, leaving no trace behind? The more Detective Sanders uncovered, the more it seemed like the mystery was tied to something far older than anyone had realized. A history that stretched back long before the Wilsons moved into 314 Evergreen Avenue. But what was truly terrifying was what they found next. When they began digging into the house's previous owners, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Each family who had lived in the house over the past 50 years had experienced similar strange occurrences, and each family had one thing in common. They had all disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The town of Silver Ridge was about to find itself at the center of a decades-old mystery. And the truth, it seemed, was darker and more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Who, or what, was behind these disappearances? And what had the Wilsons uncovered in that journal that had driven Jessica to vanish? The investigation was just beginning, but one thing was certain. 314 Evergreen Avenue had a secret, and whatever it was waiting to be uncovered. Detective Laura Sanders had seen her fair share of strange cases during her 15 years on the Silver Ridge Police Force, but nothing had prepared her for the unfolding mystery at 314 Evergreen Avenue. The disappearance of Jessica Wilson, along with the cryptic journal found at the yard sale, seemed to tie the case into something far more chilling than a simple missing person investigation. By 3:30 p.m., Detective Sanders had assembled her team, which included 2 officers. Officer Mark O'Donnell, a seasoned investigator known for his attention to detail, and Officer Lily Green, a rookie with an uncanny ability to remember the smallest of facts. Together, they began processing the scene with precision, knowing that any overlooked detail could make or break the case. The first thing Sanders ordered was a search of the entire house, focusing heavily on the basement. As mentioned in the journal, Officer O'Donnell led the charge, methodically scanning every room for evidence. "Nothing unusual up here," he said after inspecting the first floor. "Just the usual clutter. Let's head downstairs." The basement door, which had been wide open when Marisa arrived, now appeared ominously ajar. It was as if someone had been in a hurry to leave. The basement itself was musty and dimly lit, the faint smell of mildew in the air. Sanders noticed immediately that the scratch marks on the floor were not just a random scuffle. They seemed deliberate, like something heavy had been dragged from one side of the room to the other. Whoever was down here recently, they didn't leave quietly. Sanders muttered to herself as she crouched to inspect the marks. She then noticed something far more chilling. An old, rusted key lying on the floor, partially hidden beneath a pile of discarded furniture. It wasn't just any key. Its intricate engravings were unmistakable. It looked almost ceremonial, not something you would find in a normal household. Surveying the rest of the basement. Nothing else down here. No sign of a struggle. No blood, Officer O'Donnell said, scanning the room with his flashlight. But something in his voice indicated unease. "We'll need to take this key for analysis. Could be a clue." Detective Sanders nodded, already thinking ahead. The journal, the strange key, and Jessica's sudden disappearance. It was all too coincidental, but she needed more information. She turned to Officer Green. "Lily, check the old property, records. I want to know every family who's ever lived in this house, starting from the 1950s. Make sure we get names, dates, anything that could link to this weird pattern." "Got it," Green replied quickly, heading back to the car to use the database. Meanwhile, Sanders took a closer look at the journal that had started it all. The pages had been carefully folded and worn down with age. It was clear that someone had been reading it over and over again. But who? The entries didn't match any of the Wilsons' known history. Jessica had never mentioned any prior connection to the strange occurrences detailed in the journal. But there was something about the final entry, written on August 28, 1987, that sent a chill down Sanders' spine. The reference to footsteps in the hall, the mention of they coming for Evelyn. It seemed almost prophetic, as if someone had known exactly what would happen next. As Sanders continued reading, Officer O'Donnell walked over with a piece of paper in hand. "Found this in the garage. Looks like an old inventory list from an estate sale. It's got a strange notation here. Evelyn's personal items, do not touch." "Is it dated?" Sanders asked, her brow furrowing. O'Donnell looked at the paper closely. Yes, the list was made in 1988, just after the previous owners moved out. "Evelyn," Sanders muttered under her breath. It was clear that the name had significance. She had seen it before in the journal. But who was Evelyn? And why had her personal belongings been off limits? "Mark, make sure you send that to forensics. We'll need to know where it came from." As the investigation progressed, they began to uncover more peculiar details. Green had returned from the records office with a list of previous residents of 314 Evergreen Avenue. The name Evelyn Blackwell appeared several times, dating back to the late 1950s. In fact, Evelyn Blackwell had been the house's first owner, but her name disappeared from public records just after 1960. A deeper look into the file revealed that she had suffered a series of personal losses. Her husband had died suddenly, followed by the mysterious deaths of her 2 young children just a year later. Strangely, the deaths were ruled as accidental, but no one in the community ever seemed to talk about it. The most disturbing part? There were reports from neighbors describing strange sounds coming from the house during the years Evelyn lived there, similar to the footsteps mentioned in the journal. Had the house always been haunted, or was it something far more sinister at play? By 7 p.m., Sanders had her team run a background check on Evelyn Blackwell. What they uncovered was shocking. Evelyn had been a local teacher, well known in Silver Ridge. But there were whispers in the town that her behavior had become increasingly erratic after the tragic deaths of her children. One of the last known sightings of her was reported by a neighbor in 1961, who said Evelyn was seen standing in the front yard, staring at the house as though she were waiting for something or someone. Then, just like that, Evelyn had vanished from the town, leaving no trace behind. Is it possible she came back? Officer Green asked, her voice quiet as she flipped through the records. Could she have been the one to leave that journal? Sanders didn't answer immediately, her mind racing with the connections between the journal, the mysterious key, and the missing persons cases surrounding 314 Evergreen Avenue. Everything about this case seemed linked, but no one knew how. The breakthrough came just after 8:01 p.m. when the forensic team reported back. The key found in the basement, the one with the intricate engravings, matched a lockbox that had been discovered in the house's attic years earlier. The box had been sealed shut and marked with the name Blackwell. Blackwell. Again. Sanders muttered, feeling the weight of the connection settling in her chest. It all leads back to Evelyn Blackwell. She's somehow involved. But why now? And then it hit her. The journal, the key, the house. It was all coming together. The journal wasn't just about Evelyn's life. It was a map of a dark ritual, one that seemed to have been passed down through generations. But it was incomplete. The ritual required an offering, a trigger to awaken whatever force Evelyn had tried to harness all those years ago. And that offering could very well be Jessica Wilson. Evelyn Blackwell hadn't just disappeared. She had been part of something much larger, something buried in the town's history. The ritual Evelyn had tried to complete in 1987 had failed. But now, with Jessica's disappearance, it seemed that the ritual had been reawakened. As she stood up, her gaze fixed on the darkened street outside, Sanders knew the investigation was far from over. It was only just beginning. And whatever Evelyn Blackwell had started, it was clear that she was still watching, still waiting. By 11:00 p.m., the investigation had reached a fever pitch. Detective Sanders stood in the living room of 314 Evergreen Avenue, her mind spinning with the connections between the Wilsons, the Blackwells, and the strange occurrences that had been reported in the town for decades. But despite all the evidence pointing to Evelyn Blackwell, one thing was gnawing at her. Jessica Wilson hadn't just vanished. Something deeper, something far more sinister, was unfolding right before their eyes. The key, the journal, the footsteps, the strange behavior of the Wilsons. Everything was connected. But how? I think we've been looking at this all wrong, Sanders said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence in the room. She turned to Officer O'Donnell, who had been standing quietly by the door. We're so focused on Evelyn. We're ignoring what's right in front of us. Jessica didn't disappear. She was taken. And she's been part of this all along. O'Donnell's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Jessica was the one who found the journal. She knew about the ritual. She could have been a target. Sanders shook her head. No, that's not it. Jessica is the target. Or rather, she was. Oh, before she could explain further, Officer Green rushed into the room, her face pale. Detective, you need to see this. They followed Green into the basement, where the forensics team had been working tirelessly. The dim light flickered. As they reached the center of the room, there, on the floor, was a scene that made Sanders' stomach drop. A ritualistic circle had been carved into the wood, its design eerily similar to the one described in the journal. But the most chilling detail was the symbol at the center of the circle, a family crest, the same crest that had appeared in the Blackwell family records. But what truly struck them was the fresh blood spattered across the floor, still damp and glistening in the low light. And in the center of the circle, lying motionless, was Jessica Wilson. Her eyes were wide open, her body cold, but there was something about her expression, A mix of terror and confusion. That was impossible to ignore. She had been found, but she wasn't dead. Jessica stirred weakly, groaning as if awakening from a trance. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered, her voice raspy and trembling. Jessica, what happened? Sanders asked, rushing to her side. Jessica's eyes darted around the room as though she was seeing everything for the first time. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Evelyn, she came back. I was supposed to stop it, but the journal, it called me. It told me to finish it, but it was too late. The ritual, it's never finished. I never meant to. She stopped suddenly, her face contorted in fear. It's still not over. A low, guttural sound echoed through the basement, growing louder and more incomprehensible. The air grew heavy with an unnatural presence, and the room seemed to shake. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a shadow seemed to move along the walls. Officer Green, terrified, asked, "What the hell is happening?" as whispers filled the room. The voice from the journal grew louder, drowning out everything else. Then, just as suddenly, everything went silent. Jessica, horrified, confessed, "I didn't finish it. The ritual. I was too late." A loud bang echoed from upstairs, followed by heavy footsteps moving toward them. Sanders screamed for everyone to leave, but the basement door slammed shut, trapping them inside. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, tall, gaunt, and dressed in an old gown with eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. It was Evelyn Blackwell. Jessica gasped. She's come for me. The figure whispered, "You're too late. You always have been." As the house shook violently and the darkness swallowed them, everything went black. When the police arrived hours later, the house was empty. No sign of Jessica or Evelyn, only an open basement door, a strange key, and a journal with missing pages. The case was closed, but Detective Sanders knew the truth. Some stories never end. Some are just waiting to begin. Well, folks, those were today's disturbing stories. I hope they've stirred your emotions and made you reflect on the dark mysteries that surround us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't have the courage. We'll see you in the next video here on Echoes of Fear. Stay alert and sweet dreams if you can sleep.